Welcome to the comfy zone. Make yourself at home.
I'm a librarian, a keeper of knowledge, a custodian of the written word. I've been in this business for over 25 years, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the phenomena that's been taking place in our quaint yet peculiar library nestled in the heart of a small town in Maine. The Wycliffe Public Library has always been a sanctuary of sorts, a safe haven for bookworms, researchers, and curious minds alike. But for the past year, it has been anything but safe. It all started with the donations, a pile of seemingly harmless, old and slightly worn-out books that arrived in dusty boxes, left on our doorstep with a note, "May they find a new home here." We welcomed them with open arms, as any library would. At a cursory glance, these books seemed ordinary. Their contents varied from science fiction to historical accounts, romance novels to biographies. However, upon closer inspection, a chilling pattern emerged. Each book, irrespective of its genre or original storyline, appeared to predict a terrifying future. In one, a small town was consumed by a pandemic of a strange alien disease. In another, the town was swallowed whole by a sinkhole. And yet another, our peaceful town was overrun by an unnaturally aggressive and invasive species of plant life. I chalked it up to coincidence, a weird trick of the mind, until these things started to happen. The first was the sinkhole. It was like something out of a nightmare. A gaping maw that just opened up overnight at the town's center. It was massive, swallowing up buildings, roads, even a couple of cars. Miraculously, no one was hurt. Everyone was baffled. Geologists, local authorities, the townsfolk, and me. But deep down, I knew where I had read this story before. Next came the pandemic. A strange, skin-eating bacterial infection that medical professionals had never seen before. It started with a few cases, then dozens, and soon our small local hospital was overwhelmed. The CDC was called in, and our town was put under strict quarantine. Again, it was all too familiar, too close to the lines of the book I had read weeks earlier. In my growing horror and fascination, I had kept reading, unable to stop myself. What was even more unsettling was that these future events unfolded in the real world in the same sequence they were read in the library. With each book I finished, its macabre tale spun into reality soon after. As my terror grew, so did my obsession. Each novel seemed to drag me in, deeper and deeper, their prophetic tales woven into the fabric of reality. It wasn't until I discovered a seemingly inconspicuous hardcover, nestled at the very bottom of the final box, that I truly felt the ice of dread solidify in my veins. The title read, "A Librarian's Tale," and the cover showed an illustration that bore an unsettling resemblance to our Wycliffe Public Library. I flipped it open and began to read, my heart pounding in my chest. The story began innocently enough, a simple tale of a small-town librarian. But as I flipped through the pages, I began to see my life unfold before me. The narrative told of my days in the library, my encounters with townsfolk, even my own private musings. It was as if the author had been shadowing me, recording my life with an eeriness that was all too real. But it was the last chapter that filled me with a dread I had never felt before. The librarian, me, discovered the most dangerous book of all. A book so cursed that reading it would bring about the end of Wycliffe, the end of everything we knew. It was described as a book with a jet black cover adorned with a single crimson eye in its center. As if in a nightmare, I reached into the box again, my hand shaking, and pulled out the last book that lay hidden in the shadowy depths. A jet black cover with a single crimson eye in its center. I stared at it in horror. The book from the prophecy was real, and it was in my trembling hands. As I read further into A Librarian's Tale, my hands shook with the weight of what the words prophesied. According to the tale, The most dangerous book could not be hidden or destroyed. No matter how I might try to keep it from sight, a patron of the library would find it. I'd be powerless to stop it. The book would be read, and once opened, the horrors it contained would spill out, leaching into the real world with an unstoppable force. The sense of impending doom was palpable. Even the air in the library seemed to have thickened. My anxiety mirrored in the musty silence. A gust of wind shook the building, rattling the window panes and making me jump. It was as if the universe itself was reacting to the prophecy I'd just read. With a sense of dread, I finished A Librarian's Tale and closed the book. The silence of the library seemed to swallow me whole. I glanced at the forbidden book with the crimson eye, now feeling like a ticking time bomb waiting for its inevitable reader. I tried to hide it, I really did. I locked it in the basement. I buried it behind other books. I even thought about taking it home and hiding it under my bed. But no matter where I put it, the book would always reappear on the shelf in the library, its crimson eye staring ominously at me. And then it happened. One seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning, a patron, Mrs. Clara Hughes, the town baker, wandered over to the shelf and picked it up. I saw her from across the room, the book with the crimson eye in her hands. I wanted to shout, to tell her to put it back, but my voice seemed lodged in my throat. My heart pounded as I watched her flip open the cover. The words of A Librarian's Tale echoed ominously in my mind. A patron would find it, and horrors would spill out of the pages. As Mrs. Hughes began to read, I could only watch in silent horror, bracing myself for what I feared was about to come. The reality of the prophecy, etched into the pages of that unassuming book, was unfolding before my very eyes. With my heart pounding in my chest, I rushed across the room towards Mrs. Hughes, but time seemed to slow. Every step felt like wading through quicksand. I could hear the rustle of pages turning, the innocent hum of her voice as she began to read aloud. "No, stop!" I yelled, finally finding my voice, but it was too late. The moment the first word left her lips, the book erupted into an unsettling frenzy. The room darkened as if plunged into an eclipse, the overhead lights flickering and casting sinister shadows that danced along the bookshelves. A chilling wind seemed to burst forth from the book itself, sending papers flying, books toppling from shelves. And from within the pages, a terrible low growl echoed, as if some monstrous entity was awakening from a centuries-long slumber. I watched in helpless horror as the book levitated from Mrs. Hughes' trembling hands, flipping open like a creature unfurling its wings. From its depths, spectral apparitions poured out, each one more grotesque and terrifying than the last. Wailing faces twisted in torment, ghastly beasts with glowering red eyes, and eerie shadows that took the shape of unspeakable horrors, each spilled from the book, polluting the library with their malevolent presence. The peaceful sanctuary of knowledge had turned into a cauldron of chaos. Mrs. Hughes was screaming, huddled in a corner as the spectral entities circled above, their monstrous faces grinning down at her. I wanted to help her, to do something, but the sight had paralyzed me. The entities began to seep out of the library, their dark forms merging with the outside world. The once quaint town of Wycliffe was plunged into an early, unnatural night, filled with the echoing cries of its terrified inhabitants. I could only stand there, the warnings of A Librarian's Tale ringing in my ears. The end had begun, just as the book had prophesied. The horrifying spectacle went on for what felt like an eternity. When the last entity finally slipped out of the pages, the book fell to the ground with a hollow thud. Its pages blank, the crimson eye faded to a dull gray. The library was in ruins, books strewn about, their pages torn and scattered. Mrs. Hughes sat huddled in a corner, her face white as a sheet. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. I was the custodian of this library, the keeper of these books. I should have been able to prevent this, to protect my town, but instead, I had released unimaginable horrors upon it. The prophecy had come true, and I was left to bear witness to the terrible aftermath. The weight of what had happened, of what I had done, felt heavy on my shoulders. I looked out at the now darkened town, the cries of my fellow townsfolk echoing through the gloomy night. I could only hope that somehow we could find a way to fight back against the horrors that had been unleashed. But as I stood there, amidst the wreckage of my beloved library, I couldn't help but feel a sense of despair, for in my heart I knew the worst had yet to come. Wycliffe had been plunged into a terrifying nightmare, and it was all because of a librarian and his cursed books.